He was trained never to kill, no matter what. Yet in one brutal heartbeat, he broke everything he had ever been taught to save the only soul who never abandoned him. The shot meant for the man he loved still echoed in the burning ruins. But he didn't hesitate. He chose. He attacked. And for the first time, the weapon hidden inside him was unleashed not by command but by loyalty. This isn't the story of a hero who wore a badge. This is the story of the one who carried him when the world fell apart. The one who bled so his partner could stand. The one who became legend not because he obeyed, but because he loved too fiercely to let death win. Before you judge him, before you understand why the city would never forget his name, stay, watch, feel every step he took through fire and betrayal. If this story touches something deep in you, if it reminds you that loyalty can be stronger than fate, leave a like, subscribe for more stories that matter, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. The rain fell in shimmering sheets across downtown Haven City, blurring the neon lights into bleeding rivers of color. Officer Marcus Evans sat silently in the patrol car, his fingers absently drumming against the worn steering wheel. Next to him, Zeus, a towering German shepherd with a coat like midnight steel, sat rigid and alert. There was an air about the night that Marcus couldn't shake off, a hum beneath the noise, a whisper under the storm. Etched crackled over the radio, the voice taut with urgency. Unit 814, suspicious activity reported at the Old Solace warehouse, West District. Possible armed individuals. Backup en route but delayed by flooding. Proceed with extreme caution. Marcus glanced at Zeus, who met his gaze with uncanny focus. For 3 years they had been inseparable, more than handler and canine. They were brothers in arms. Tonight felt different. It gnawed at Marcus, cold and clawing. Looks like it's just us, partner, Marcus muttered, giving Zeus a quick scratch behind the ear. Zeus, normally composed, emitted a low, almost imperceptible whine, something he had never done before in operation. Marcus froze. Zeus was the epitome of discipline, a product of a highly classified canine program Marcus once only heard rumors about, until the day he was assigned a dog that could sniff out lies the way others sniffed out explosives. Zeus's sudden unease wasn't random. It was a sign. Still, the call had been made, and procedure was procedure. Marcus pulled the cruiser to a slow stop half a block from the warehouse, killing the lights. Rain hammered the hood as he surveyed the looming structure ahead, a skeletal giant draped in rust and graffiti, its broken windows gaping like hollow eyes. He loaded his sidearm, checked the second clip, and slid it back into the holster with muscle memory honed by years on the force. "Stay tight," he whispered. Zeus responded with a low grunt, muscles taut, hackles slightly raised. Together, they crossed into the wet abyss. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and cold metal. Puddles swallowed their footsteps. Zeus's paws made almost no sound on the cracked asphalt. As they neared the warehouse, Marcus caught the faintest glimmer of movement through a shattered window. Instinctively, he ducked behind a stack of abandoned pallets. Zeus pressed low beside him. Through the rain and darkness, Marcus could just make out silhouettes, 3, maybe 4 men shuffling about inside, their voices indistinct but urgent. Something about their posture was wrong. They weren't looters. They were waiting, setting something, laying a trap. His pulse quickened, adrenaline flooding his veins. He tapped Zeus's flank twice, standard signal for recon. Zeus slipped ahead, a shadow within shadows. Marcus kept his gun raised, pivoting slowly around the pallets to get a clearer view. Suddenly, Zeus stopped, stiffened, and locked eyes with Marcus. A single, deliberate bark, a signal he had been trained to give only under the most specific, dire circumstances. Target identified. High-value threat. Marcus's breath caught. Before he could react, a floodlight blazed to life, cutting through the rain like a blade. Voices shouted, guns cocked. The trap was sprung. "Hands where we can see him, officer," barked a man's voice over a loudspeaker, distorted by static. Marcus instinctively stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding. They knew he was coming. How? Zeus growled low, inching back to Marcus's side, eyes locked on the floodlight's source. Then Marcus heard the faintest mechanical beep from the warehouse's roofline. His blood ran cold. Tripwires, explosives rigged to the perimeter. This wasn't a simple stakeout, it was an ambush, a kill box, and he had walked them both right into it. Sweat mingled with the rain as Marcus weighed his options. Run? No way. They'd be gunned down before clearing the lot. Fight? Maybe, maybe not. He met Zeus's gaze. In the dog's eyes, there was no panic, only fierce, relentless loyalty. Marcus knew then that whatever was coming, Zeus would face it with him, to the bitter end if necessary. But Marcus also remembered something else. A rumor from the old academy days. Certain canines like Zeus weren't just trained, they were bred for something more. Rescue under impossible odds. Extraction missions deep behind enemy lines. If Zeus was reacting like this, it meant one thing. There was still a way out, but it would require everything they had. Marcus drew in a slow breath, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on him. "Right, buddy," he whispered, voice steady despite the chaos closing in. "Let's show them what they forgot to fear." Zeus let out a low rumble of agreement, muscles coiling like a spring about to snap. Somewhere in the distance, another crackle of thunder rolled across the city. It was the only warning they would get. Marcus broke from cover, gun blazing, Zeus surging ahead like a bullet of muscle and fury. The old instincts kicked in, and the warehouse exploded into violence. Rain battered Marcus's face as he charged toward the open bay doors. Zeus a dark blur at his side, the floodlight momentarily blinding him to everything beyond the first few steps. The shouting grew louder, distorted through the pounding storm, and the flash of movement ahead triggered pure instinct. Without hesitation, Marcus raised his Glock and squeezed the trigger, the gun's report deafening against the slap of rain and thunder. The figure crumpled with a grunt, dropping hard onto the soaked concrete. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering against his ribs like a war drum. Zeus growled low, alert but not advancing. Something felt wrong. A flicker of uncertainty pierced Marcus's mind, slicing through the adrenaline haze. Through the dim light, he caught a glimpse of a badge falling from the man's jacket, glinting under the streetlight. Horror twisted his gut. The man he had shot wasn't hostile. It was an officer, or at least someone dressed like one. Marcus moved cautiously closer, weapon trained, and nudged the fallen body with his boot. Blood pooled beneath the man, mingling with the rainwater. His face was partially obscured by a tactical helmet, but the patches on his vest were unmistakable. Haven PD. A sinking realization hit Marcus like a freight train. Either this officer had been in on the trap, or Marcus had just killed an innocent man trying to survive the same setup. He clenched his jaw, forcing back the wave of self-recrimination rising inside him. There was no time to process guilt. Movement flickered again in his peripheral vision. Zeus barked sharply and lunged left, his leash taut with urgency. Marcus spun, following his partner's lead, and caught sight of a man slipping along the shadows of the warehouse wall. Something heavy and metallic clutched to his chest. Marcus's eyes narrowed. The man wasn't retreating or seeking cover. He was moving with purpose, shielding something under his coat as if protecting it at all costs. Zeus snarled, the sound primal and raw, and Marcus understood immediately. The man was carrying an explosive device, maybe more than one. Suddenly the pieces clicked into place in Marcus's mind. The warehouse wasn't just a kill box for him, it was a statement. Whoever had orchestrated this wanted the entire structure leveled. Maybe to destroy evidence, maybe to send a message, or maybe simply to erase Marcus Evans from the world in a blaze of fire and blood. The memory of Zeus's earlier unease, his unprecedented whine in the cruiser, slammed into Marcus's chest like a hammer. His partner had known from the beginning that something about this mission stank of death. Marcus adjusted his grip on the Glock, cursing under his breath. No backup, no safe retreat, no margin for error. Zeus lunged forward, snapping his teeth just inches from the man's trailing leg. The suspect stumbled, revealing a flash of wiring and a blinking red light beneath his jacket. Marcus's blood iced over. Live detonator. Zeus hurled the man into a tight corner, forcing him to face Marcus, who leveled his weapon with iron focus. "Drop it," Marcus shouted over the storm, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then, in a move Marcus didn't anticipate, the man grinned a cold, mirthless expression and reached for the device. Time snapped like a brittle thread. Marcus fired, 2 controlled shots center mass, watching as the man's body jerked backward and collapsed against the wall. The device clattered onto the ground, its blinking light stuttering but not stopping. Marcus didn't dare approach. Zeus stood over the fallen detonator, barking once a sharp, commanding note they had trained for during bomb threat drills. Marcus activated his radio, hissing into the mic. Unit 814, immediate EOD support needed at Solace Warehouse. Active explosive device, operator down. Repeat, active explosive device. Whether the storm was blocking the signal or someone had jammed the frequencies, was alone. He knelt next to Zeus, scanning the area, mind racing. They needed a plan. Fast. Around them, shadows shifted as more figures closed in, emboldened now that Marcus's position had been compromised. Every instinct screamed at him to grab Zeus and run. But abandoning the explosive meant risking a catastrophic detonation that could wipe out half the block and every innocent soul still sheltering from the storm nearby. Marcus's hands shook for a split second before steel resolve took over. They would have to disarm it themselves, or at least buy time. Zeus whined low, sensing the shift in Marcus's energy. Another movement in the corner of Marcus's eye. Someone new stepping into the chaos. A figure cloaked in darkness and authority, issuing sharp commands in a voice Marcus barely caught over the rain. Reinforcements? Or more enemies? No assumptions anymore. No trust left to spare. As he prepared to move, Zeus suddenly bristled, his body stiffening like a drawn bow. His nose pointed sharply at the newcomer, then to the detonator, then back again, a signal Marcus had only seen once before, during a decover operation in Wara's hostile. High Osk. Likely armed. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the gaunt, hard-fed face of the approaching figure. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face. Not from the city, not from the department, from old photographs in secret files, from whispered warnings traded like contraband between trusted friends. This man wasn't a cop. He wasn't even a criminal in the traditional sense. He was something worse. Something much worse. The figure stepped fully into the circle of dim light, revealing tactical gear slick with rain and a grin that sent ice lancing down Marcus's spine. There was no mistaking it now. The man was a mercenary. Not some street thug or desperate criminal, but a professional. The kind who didn't just kill, they erased. For a fraction of a second, hesitated, recalculating. But that heartbeat was all the time his enemy needed. A sharp crack shattered the air, louder even than the thunder, and a white-hot pain erupted in Marcus's side. His body jerked violently, the Glock slipping from his fingers, clattering uselessly to the flooded ground. He staggered back, confusion and shock warring for dominance in his mind. Another shot rang out, this one grazing his thigh, spinning him further into the open. His knees buckled, the world tilting wildly around him as he collapsed onto the wet concrete, the impact jarring his battered body and forcing the breath from his lungs. Instantly, warmth blossomed beneath him, spreading across his uniform, sticky and thick, the unmistakable bloom of blood. Marcus gasped, struggling to draw in a full breath as agony flared through his torso. The radio pinned to his vest crackled once, then sputtered and fell silent, its casing fractured by the force of the fall and the rain seeping into its exposed circuits. Any hope of backup, of a desperate call for help, died there with the flicker of static. Alone. He was truly alone. Zeus barked, a harsh, desperate sound, and lunged toward the shooter, teeth bared and muscles straining against the leash still clipped to Marcus's belt. The mercenary raised his weapon again, but Zeus didn't falter, his body a missile of fury and protection. Another gunshot split the night, but Zeus veered at the last instant, dodging the bullet by sheer instinct. He returned to Marcus's side, instead of pressing the attack, positioning his massive body between Marcus and the advancing threat. Rain poured from the heavens in torrents now, soaking everything in an icy shroud. Marcus lay motionless, his mind clouded by pain and shock, barely able to lift his head to see the blurry outline of his partner standing guard. Zeus was trembling, not from fear, but from the strain of holding himself back from attacking, from his training that demanded he protect above all else. The mercenary approached with deliberate slowness, savoring the moment. His boots splashed through puddles, his weapon leveled casually at Marcus's prone form, confident the kill was inevitable. Zeus growled, low and lethal, and in that instant, Marcus saw something extraordinary. Zeus shifted his stance, lowering his center of gravity, every muscle primed to launch, But he didn't. Instead, he braced himself in front of Marcus, absorbing every ounce of threat with his body, a living shield against the storm of violence bearing down upon them. It would have been easy, almost natural for any dog, even one trained as highly as Zeus, to flee under such circumstances, to retreat and survive. But Zeus wasn't built that way. Loyalty was etched into his very bones. A loyalty so fierce it defied every instinct of self-preservation. Marcus tried to speak, to order Zeus away, but his voice was a broken rasp lost in the cacophony of the storm. Blood bubbled at the corners of his lips as he coughed, his vision narrowing to a tight tunnel of swirling gray and black. His body betrayed him, refusing to obey, leaving him trapped inside himself, helpless to stop what was coming. Zeus barked again, a bark that sounded almost like a war cry, and took a half step forward, daring the enemy to advance. The mercenary paused, his smile faltering just slightly, perhaps recognizing that killing Marcus would not be as simple as executing a wounded man. It would mean facing a creature who would die before allowing harm to come to his partner. Another figure moved behind the mercenary, indistinct through the sheets of rain. Reinforcements, maybe, or another layer to the trap. It didn't matter. Marcus blinked hard, trying to force his battered mind to focus, to find any thread of strategy or hope. All he could feel was the searing agony of his wound and the solid, immovable presence of Zeus at his side. The world was slipping away, the edges growing softer, the sounds dulling as if he were spinning her forever. In a distant part of his mind, Marcus thought he heard the crackle of another radio, or maybe it was just the last remnants of static from his shattered unit. He couldn't tell anymore. Zeus didn't move. He stood sentinel over Marcus's broken body, unwavering, as the mercenary raised his weapon once more, and the rain fell harder, turning the asphalt into a black river beneath their feet. The storm raged above, tearing at the battered streets of Haven City, as Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, the thunder rolling like distant artillery in a war he no longer had the strength to fight. Blood seeped from his wounds, pooling beneath him, his breathing shallow and uneven. Above him, Zeus remained, soaked to the bone, his massive body rigid with tension, his amber eyes locked onto the advancing mercenary who now moved with the lazy confidence of a man sure of victory. The mercenary leveled his gun, aiming carefully, taking his time to savor the kill. But just as his finger tightened on the trigger, Zeus did something that defied every protocol, every expectation. He turned, his sharp teeth biting into the front pocket of Marcus's tactical vest, tearing at the thick fabric with desperate urgency. The movement exposed a small black device stitched carefully into the lining of Marcus's gear, a relic from a time when he was assigned to special operations, a device so secret that even most of his current department never knew it existed. It was a hidden emergency beacon, an encrypted signal designed to transmit a distress call directly to a covert network of responders, trained for the kind of dirty, unsanctioned situations that normal law enforcement couldn't touch. The beacon, dormant for years, now blinked to life as Zeus's teeth clamped down on it and jerked it free, its tiny LED flaring red against the rain-slicked night. Somewhere deep in the city, in forgotten rooms filled with ancient servers and dust-covered monitors, a silent alarm began to scream. The mercenary froze mid-step, catching the sudden glow out of the corner of his eye, his expression twisting from triumph into cold fury. Zeus snarled, standing protectively over Marcus's broken body, the device still clutched in his powerful jaws. The mercenary's mouth moved, forming words Marcus couldn't hear. The mason braced. He barked orders into a calm peace hidden beneath his collar, and almost immediately more shadows peeled themselves from the darkness, converging on the scene. Zeus bared his teeth, growling so low it vibrated through the concrete beneath their feet. The mercenary waved his hand, a sharp, decisive motion, signaling for his men to close in. But before they could reach Marcus, the night fractured with the sudden, whirling howl of helicopter blades cutting through the rain. A searchlight snapped on, blindingly bright, brightly bright, heading the ground as the black silhouette of an unmarked helicopter descended from the storm clouds like a ventral. Tactical ropes snaked down from the open bay doors, and figures in dark, featureless gear rappelled swiftly toward the ground. The mercenaries hesitated, their lines wavering for the first time, sensing that whatever reinforcements they had anticipated were not the ones arriving now. Zeus took the moment of confusion and bolted forward, positioning himself over Marcus's chest, growling in a warning that was no longer just for the mercenaries. It was for anyone who dared to touch his partner. Amidst the chaos, Marcus forced his eyes open, squinting through the sheets of rain and blood blurring his vision, just in time to see the first of the new arrivals land heavily on the ground, raising a weapon and shouting a command he couldn't fully comprehend. His body refused to move, locked in the numb paralysis of blood loss and trauma. But his mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Then he saw him, emerging from behind the mercenaries, untouched by the panic around him, walking with the calm certainty of a man who believed himself untouchable. The floodlights caught the hard lines of his face, the crisp uniform, the gleaming badge that shone even in the storm. Deputy Chief Raymond Vance. Marcus's former mentor, his sponsor, the man who had plucked him from obscurity as a rookie officer and molded him into what he had become, the man he had trusted above all others. Vance's gaze was ice cold, his mouth set in a grim line as he surveyed the scene. There was no surprise in his expression, no shock at seeing Marcus bleeding out on the ground or the sudden arrival of a covert rescue team, only calculation. Vance lifted a hand, signaling subtly to the mercenaries to stand down. A few obeyed immediately, lowering their weapons, their loyalty bought and paid for long before tonight. Marcus's heart twisted, betrayal cutting deeper than any bullet wound. He tried to speak, tried to shout a warning to the black-clad rescuers descending around him, but only a wet gasp escaped his lips. Zeus turned his head, sensing Marcus's renewed panic, and barked furiously at Vance, the sound savage enough to draw startled flinches from the men still standing. Vance narrowed his eyes at Zeus, his hand drifting toward the sidearm holstered at his hip. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the raw hatred etched into every line of the deputy chief's face. Marcus realized with a sick clarity that Vance hadn't come to supervise the rescue. He had come to ensure there were no survivors. Rain continued to pummel the broken concrete as Marcus lay bleeding beneath the oppressive storm clouds, every breath a ragged battle against the weight of his injuries. His mind swam in and out of focus, and through the haze of blood and betrayal, he watched Deputy Chief Vance stride toward him with cold inevitability, his weapon now drawn and hanging casually at his side. Zeus snarled furiously, but remained rooted over Marcus. His body tires emphasized enough for the retrospect. More mercenaries circled like vultures, creating a living wall of steel and malice. One of them stepped closer, the movement catching Marcus's blurred vision, a figure half hidden behind a tactical mask. Drenched in rain, the muzzle of a rifle trained lazily on Zeus. For a fleeting second, something flickered in the man's body language. An uncertainty, a hesitation that none of the others showed. Marcus narrowed his eyes, struggling against the blackness clouding his thoughts, forcing himself to focus on that one figure. A sliver of memory, sharp and sudden, sliced through the fog of pain. The way the man moved, the way he tilted his head when surveying the situation, it was achingly familiar. Something Marcus hadn't seen in almost 15 years. Heart hammering despite his failing body, Marcus blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, and through the storm and the mask, he caught a glimpse of dark brown eyes, wide and haunted, the left eye marked by a faint, crescent-shaped scar, a scar he knew all too well. Time seemed to slow as recognition slammed into Marcus like a bullet. Isaiah, his younger brother, the brother Marcus had lost after a house fire when they were teenagers, the brother he had spent years searching for until the trail went cold and grief became a silent, gnawing companion. Yet here Isaiah stood, alive but twisted by circumstance, wearing the uniform of a killer, a pawn entangled in the dark web Vance had woven. Marcus tried to speak, to call out, but the blood in his throat choked the words into nothing. Isaiah shifted uncomfortably, his rifle wavering ever so slightly, his gaze locking with Marcus's across the rain-slicked battlefield, a silent recognition flashing between them before it was buried under the cold mask of duty. Vance didn't notice or didn't care. His focus was entirely on Zeus, on ending the last threat standing between him and a clean cover-up. He raised his weapon, took aim at the dog's broad chest, and prepared to fire. But Zeus moved first. In a blur of soaked fur and muscle, Zeus grabbed Marcus's vest with his powerful jaws and began to drag him, inch by agonizing inch, away from the circle of death closing around them. Marcus's battered body scraped across the rough concrete, every movement sending spikes of pain radiating through his nerves. But Zeus, he pulled with a desperation fueled by instinct and something deeper. Love, loyalty, an unbreakable bond that no bullet could sever. Shots rang out behind them, bullets chewing into the ground. But Zeus zigzagged, using his body to shield Marcus even as gunfire stitched the air around them. Vance shouted orders, furious as his men scrambled to regroup. But Zeus was already hauling Marcus toward a crumbling section of the warehouse wall, half hidden by debris and shadow. Marcus's blurred gaze caught the faint outline of something he had only heard about in whispered conversations among the department's inner circle. A maintenance hatch, part of a network of secret tunnels built decades ago beneath Haven City for emergency evacuations. Long since forgotten by most, only high-handing officers knew about the existence of these tunnels. A relic of a paranoid era that had quietly faded into myth. Zeus found the hatch, his paws scrabbling at the rusted metal, barking urgently. Marcus, barely conscious, reached out with trembling fingers and found the recessed handle, pulling with what little strength remained. With a screech of protesting hinges, the hatch swung open, revealing a gaping mouth of darkness. Without hesitation, Zeus clamped his teeth around Marcus's vest again and dragged him down into the hole. Out of the open, out of the kill zone, into the choking, oppressive darkness of the underground. Above them, furious shouts echoed as Vance's men realized their prey had slipped from their grasp. The mercenaries surged toward the hatch, firing blindly into the shadows. But Zeus and Marcus were already gone, swallowed by the black underbelly of the city. The tunnel was damp and narrow, the walls slick with decades of moisture and neglect. But to Marcus, it felt like salvation. He gasped for breath, pain lancing through his side, and forced his eyes to stay open. Zeus stayed close, nudging him forward, urging him to keep moving, to survive just a little longer. Somewhere behind them, faint and growing louder, the heavy boots of pursuers began to echo down the stone corridor. The darkness in the tunnel wrapped around Marcus like a living thing, thick and suffocating, pressing against every inch of his broken body as Zeus guided him deeper into the forgotten arteries beneath the city. His consciousness flickered like a dying flame, pain and exhaustion warring for dominance, until finally the blackness claimed him completely. When Marcus opened his eyes again, the world was wrong. Gone was the cold, grimy embrace of the tunnel, replaced by blinding fluorescent lights humming overhead, sterile and pitiless. He was lying on a steel table, wrists and ankles strapped down with thick leather cuffs. His wounds bandaged with clinical efficiency, but no sign of compassion. The antiseptic air reeked of chemicals and old blood. A low growl vibrated against his ears, and he turned his head weakly to the side to see Zeus pacing restlessly inside a reinforced glass enclosure nearby, his coat matted and slick, his body visibly trembling with suppressed rage. Marcus tried to speak, but his throat was raw, the words scraping painfully up from a parched gullet. A figure in a lab coat moved into his line of sight, clipboard in hand, face obscured by a surgical mask. "Good, you're awake," the man said, his voice muffled but disturbingly calm. "We were beginning to think the blood loss would take you before the procedure could be completed." Procedure? The word sent a cold bolt of terror through Marcus's battered mind. He struggled against the restraints, weakly at first, then with growing panic. But the leather bonds held firm. The man in the lab coat scribbled something on his clipboard, then tapped on the glass separating Marcus from Zeus. "Your dog is quite remarkable," he mused aloud. "Part of an early prototype program, Project Cerberus. Genetic augmentation, behavioral conditioning," and Marcus's heart pounded against his ribs, the truth slamming into him with brutal force. Project Cerberus, the classified initiative whispered about in corners of police academies and military barracks. A program so controversial it was buried under layers of red tape and denial. Zeus wasn't just trained, he was engineered. "Why?" Marcus croaked, forcing the word past cracked lips. The man in the lab coat chuckled, a hollow, joyless sound. "Because loyalty can be manufactured, officer. Conditioned, upgraded. Your dog, however," he tapped the glass again, shaking his head. "He's been..." Marcus's blood ran cold. He saw it then embedded in the thick fur of Zeus's neck, just below the collar line, a tiny metal protrusion, barely noticeable to an untrained eye. A control chip. Marcus had heard rumors of such devices, used in black operations to override even the strongest natural instincts, to turn loyal companions into unthinking weapons. Rage flooded him, momentarily giving him strength he didn't know he still possessed. He thrashed against the restraints, but the table held firm. The scientist watched with mild amusement, as if observing a particularly lively specimen rather than a human being. "We had to install the chip after your little escape," the man said matter-of-factly. "Standard procedure. Once the command is activated, he'll be ours completely. You, unfortunately, will not be needed beyond data collection." He turned away, reaching for a small control panel mounted on the wall, his fingers dancing over the keypad. Marcus's heart screamed in silent protest, but before the scientist could complete the sequence, Zeus, in a movement so swift it blurred the eye, Zeus twisted his powerful head and sank his own teeth into the flesh near the implant, tearing savagely. Blood sprayed against the glass, and Zeus let out a guttural yelp of pain, but he did not stop. He dug deeper, wrenching the chip free in a spray of metal and flesh, spitting the tiny device onto the floor with a snarl of defiance. Alarms blared instantly, the sterile calm of the facility shattering into chaos. Red warning lights pulsed overhead, and the scientist cursed, slamming his fist against the panel. Zeus, unshackled from the technological leash, threw himself at the weakened section of the enclosure, ramming it with his full weight again and again. Cracks widened, spidering into a web of fractures. Marcus pulled with everything he had left against his restraints, the leather creaked ominously but refusing to break. The scientist whirled around, reaching for a syringe on a nearby tray, but Zeus struck first. With a final, ear-splitting crash, the glass enclosure shattered outward, and Zeus surged through the debris, teeth flashing. The scientist barely had time to scream before Zeus was on him, driving to the floor with terrifying precision. Marcus turned his head away, grimacing as the sounds of the brief, brutal struggle echoed through the sterile chamber. When the room fell silent, Zeus limped toward Marcus, blood dripping from his muzzle, his breathing ragged but determined. With surprising gentleness, he reared up and used his weight to press against the table's locking mechanism. It gave way with a metallic snap, and Marcus's right wrist came free. He wasted no time clawing at the remaining restraints, his hands slick with sweat and blood. Zeus stood watch over him, growling low in his throat, ears pinned back, body poised for another fight. As Marcus struggled free, footsteps thundered from down the hall. The sharp bark of orders shouted in a language Marcus didn't immediately recognize. Marcus staggered to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest, but he forced himself upright, his mind already racing ahead even as his body lagged behind. Zeus pressed against his side, half-crouched and ready to spring at any threat, blood still dripping from his muzzle but eyes clear, sharp, waiting only for the slightest signal from Marcus. Heavy boots pounded closer, their echoes bouncing off the sterile walls, the shouts growing louder, more urgent. Marcus glanced around the room, taking in the overturned trays, the shattered glass, the broken restraints. There was no cover, no way to fight their way out of this cleanly. His mind sharpened, cutting through the fog of pain and fatigue. If he moved now, if he fought now, they would both be gunned down before they even reached the door. He needed a better plan, fast. With a grunt of effort, Marcus slumped against the steel table, letting his legs buckle, his body sliding down to the cold floor. He let his head loll to one side, let his chest rise and fall in slow, shallow breaths, mimicking the signs of someone on the edge of unconsciousness, someone too weak to be a threat. Zeus hesitated, confused for a split second, but when Marcus gave the faintest flick of his fingerstay, Zeus dropped low beside him, muscles tense, head lowered, playing the obedient, harmless dog. The door burst open with a bang, and a squad of armed men flooded into the room, their rifles sweeping the corners before settling on Marcus and Zeus. One of them, clearly in charge by the way the others deferred to him, stepped forward, a snare curling his lip beneath a black tactical mask. Marcus recognized the man's voice instantly, even before he ripped off the mask to reveal the scarred face underneath Vance. Deputy Chief Raymond Vance, the betrayer, the architect of this nightmare. Vance approached with slow, deliberate steps, pistol drawn but held loosely, confidence radiating off him in waves. He wasn't afraid. He believed Marcus was finished, helpless. Easy to clean up. Tough son of a bitch, aren't you? Vance muttered, circling Marcus's prone form like a shark scenting blood. You should have stayed in your lane, Evans. Should have played along? You could have had it all. Marcus stayed limp, letting his gaze flutter half-closed, heart pounding against his ribs so violently he thought they might crack. Vance crouched down, gun inches from Marcus's temple, and for a terrible moment Marcus thought the man would just shoot him then and there. But instead Vance leaned in closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Pity, he said almost gently. You could have been used. He drove his knee upward with every ounce of remaining strength, slamming it into Vance's unprotected throat. Vance choked, stumbling back, his weapon flying from his hand. At the same moment, Zeus launched from the floor like a missile, barreling into the nearest guard and sending the man sprawling. Chaos erupted. Shouts filled the air, gunfire sparked against the steel walls, and Marcus rolled toward Vance's discarded pistol, scooping it up and firing 2 quick shots into the chest of the nearest threat. Zeus moved like a shadow of fury, weaving between attackers, jaws snapping, driving men back in terror. But they couldn't stay here. Marcus knew reinforcements would flood in within seconds. He needed an escape route, and fast. He and Zeus crashed through the doorway into a narrow corridor, alarms screaming overhead, red lights flashing wildly. Men poured after them, bullets ricocheting off the concrete, but Zeus stayed close, his body a moving shield as Marcus staggered forward. As they sprinted down the hallway, Zeus suddenly veered to the left, nose to the ground, sniffing furiously. Marcus followed without hesitation, trusting his partner's instincts more than his own failing senses. They burst into a storage room piled high with old equipment and forgotten supplies. It was a dead end, or it should have been. Zeus darted toward a stack of crates, teeth latching onto something half-hidden among the debris. He yanked hard, dragging out a writhing figure, a man in tactical gear who had been trying to hide, a traitor caught in the act of deserting his post. The man struggled, shouting curses, but Zeus clamped down on his arm with ruthless efficiency, forcing him to drop a small, battered keycard that clattered to the floor. Marcus snatched it up even as gunfire tore through the crates around them. He barely glanced at the label printed on the card, but the words burned into his mind: archive access, clearance lack, la lock, high card. If the rumors were true, if Vance's operation really had a heart, it would be hidden in the secret archives, the place where every dirty deal, every blackmail file, every blood-stained piece of evidence was kept. The place Vance could not afford to have exposed. Zeus released the traitor with a savage shove, sending the man crashing unconscious into a pile of rusted shelves, then turned to Marcus, panting but ready. They had a chance, a real chance, not just to survive but to bring the whole rotten empire down around Vance's ears. Marcus tucked the keycard into his vest and motioned to Zeus. Together, they plunged deeper into the bowels of the facility, the walls narrowing, the alarms shrieking, the scent of smoke and fear growing stronger with every step. Marcus and Zeus pushed deeper into the labyrinth of narrow corridors, every footstep echoing like a gunshot in the cramped halls. Their breathing heavy but controlled, their movements synchronized from years of trust forged in fire. The stolen keycard clutched in Marcus's blood-slicked fingers was their only chance now, the only thread dangling between them and the heart of the corruption that had nearly destroyed them. They moved fast, urgency prickling across Marcus's spine like static electricity as alarms continued to wail, the facility's automated lockdown systems grinding into motion with metallic groans. Suddenly, a sharp blast blasted from up ahead, a heavy steel door being forced open, and Marcus skidded to a halt, yanking Zeus back against the shadows of a recessed doorway. Down the hallway, figures appeared through the strobe-like flashes of red emergency lights, silhouettes bristling with weapons and body armor marked with the Haven City Police Department insignia. Reinforcements, finally. Relief surged hot and bright through Marcus's battered chest, until instinct, that old soldier's sixth sense, screamed in protest. Something was wrong. The way the men moved, the way they scanned the corners without urgency, their lazy discipline, it was all wrong. These weren't allies rushing to rescue a fallen comrade. These were wolves who already knew exactly what they were hunting. Zeus sensed it too. His body stiffened, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat, ears pinned back. eyes sharp with warning. Marcus trusted him implicitly. He pulled Zeus further into the shadows, heart sinking as he watched one of the supposed officers speak into a shoulder mic. The words just audible over the shrieking alarms. Target moving toward Sector 7. Secure the archive access point. Orders are to contain or terminate. Not rescue, contain, terminate. Marcus's blood turned to ice. They had been bought. The very force he had once sworn his life to had been hollowed out from within, corrupted until only the uniform remained. Rage boiled up inside him, molten and searing, but he shoved it down with the precision of a man who knew rage was useless unless sharpened into a weapon. He needed another way out, fast. He crouched low, Zeus mirroring his every move, and together they slipped through a maintenance hatch partially concealed behind a row of supply crates, emerging into a secondary service corridor that reeked of mildew and ancient dust. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, momentarily obscured by layers of crumbling concrete and twisting passageways. Marcus leaned heavily against the wall, chest heaving, trying to orient himself. The keycard burned against his palm, a reminder of the objective still unfinished. He was about to move when Zeus froze, nose lifted high, nostrils flaring. Marcus tensed automatically, his gaze following the dog's every movement. Zeus sniffed the air again, then let out a low, questioning whine, his body language shifting from tension to something more deliberate and alert, but not an aggressive one. Marcus frowned, trusting Zeus's instincts even when he didn't yet understand them. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered hoarsely. Zeus took a cautious step forward, then another, his movements careful but purposeful, tail rigid with concentration. He was tracking something, not a sound, not a sight, but a scent, one powerful enough to cut through the rot and grime saturating the tunnels. Marcus followed, gun raised, every sense stretched to its limit. They wound through the maze-like underbelly of the facility, past abandoned service rooms and forgotten storage bays, the only light the flickering pulse of emergency strobes. Finally, Zeus stopped before a heavy, rusted door set deep into the concrete, its surface unmarked and its lock long since corroded. He pawed at the threshold once, then sat back, looking up at Marcus with expectant eyes. Marcus hesitated only a moment before inserting the keycard into a small reader mounted inconspicuously beside the door. To his surprise, the old mechanism beeped and clicked, and the door swung inward with a groan of long-disused hinges. The room beyond was dimly lit by a series of ancient industrial lamps, their glow casting deep shadows across a group of figures clustered around a table strewn with maps, documents, and weapons. They turned as Marcus and Zeus entered, hands reaching instinctively for holstered guns, but then stopped, recognition flickering across weathered faces. These were not Vance's mercenaries. Their uniforms were mismatched, some police issue, some military surplus, all worn and battle-stained. Their eyes, though hard, were clear, unclouded by greed or fear. In the center of them stood a tall man with a shaved head and a face lined by both age and experience. He regarded Marcus with cautious respect, then nodded once sharply. "Evans," he said. His voice was rough but steady. "We've been waiting for you." Marcus lowered his weapon slightly, stunned. "Who the hell are you?" The man stepped forward into the light, revealing a faded badge pinned to his chest, the metal tarnished but still recognizable. "Call us what you want," he said. "We're what's left of the real Haven City Police Department, the ones who wouldn't sell their souls." A murmur ran through the group behind him, a low current of grim affirmation. Zeus moved to stand protectively in front of Marcus, but the tension in the room had shifted. It was no longer a standoff but something closer to a reckoning. Marcus's mind raced. These were the ghosts, the men and women who had quietly disappeared over the years, dismissed for insubordination, transferred without cause, some rumored dead or missing. Now he understood they hadn't vanished, they had gone underground, surviving in the shadows, waiting for a moment like this. The man in front, who Marcus realized must have once held serious rank, jerked his chin toward the keycard still clutched in Marcus's hand. "You have the access." The room buzzed with a sudden, electrifying urgency as Marcus stood, surrounded by the shadowed figures of the True Haven City officers. Men and women who had risked everything to protect an ideal long since buried by corruption. Maps were spread out across the battered metal table, alongside printed surveillance photos and hastily scrawled notes detailing hidden compartments, secret accounts, and coded communications. The tall leader, who introduced himself simply as Cole, outlined the situation in clipped, rapid tones. "The archive you're looking for is under Sector 12, he said, tapping a faded blueprint with a gloved finger. "Vance keeps it off, got no electronic record, no digital backups, only physical files, hard drives, and a lot of dirty money moved in and out through a shell fund linked to the mayor's office." Marcus listened intently, every word sharpening his focus. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking back everything they had lost, about making Vance pay for every betrayal, every life destroyed. "He's a service elevator still operational," Cole continued, nodding toward a side corridor. "We rigged it years ago, bypassed their internal alarms. It'll take you straight to the subault." Marcus tightened his grip on the stolen keycard, feeling its sharp edge bite into his palm. Zeus, alert and tense at his side, seemed to understand the stakes as if he could feel the electricity in the air. Together they moved, Cole and 3 others falling in behind them, weaving through the decaying hallways until they reached a rusted freight elevator. The ride down was silent except for the mechanical groan of ancient cables, each jolt making Marcus's pulse hammer harder in his ears. When the doors rattled open, a blast of cold, dry air hit them, carrying the scent of concrete, dust, and something fouler, greed and decay given form. They moved cautiously, boots whispering across the cracked tiles. Zeus led the way, nose to the ground, muscles rippling beneath his rain-soaked coat. Marcus followed close behind, weapon raised, senses razor-sharp. The vault lay behind a thick steel door at the end of the hall, guarded by a biometric scanner and a keypad. Cole stepped forward, using a device he pulled from his jacket to scramble the scanner, while Marcus swiped the stolen keycard. The door shuddered, beeped twice, then swung open with a hiss of released pressure. Inside, the air was colder still, and Marcus's stomach twisted as he took in the sight. Rows upon rows of filing cabinets, sealed crates stacked 10 feet high, piles of cash bundled in tight, neat bricks. Marcus crossed the room in long strides, ignoring the whisper of temptation that clung to the stacks of money, and went straight for the case. It was locked, but another swipe of the keycard released the mechanism with a soft click. He flipped it open to reveal a treasure trove of damning evidence. Photographs labeled with initials and dates, photographs of clandestine meetings, wire transfer receipts including high-paying officials across the city government, including Vance. His heart pounded with grim satisfaction. This was it, the proof they needed to blow the entire rotten edifice apart. Zeus barked once, a sharp warning, and Marcus snapped his head up just in time to see movement at the edge of the vault entrance. Figures slipped in, weapons raised. Vance's personal death squad, faster than expected, eyes cold and merciless. Cole and the others opened fire without hesitation, and the confined space erupted into chaos. Marcus ducked behind a crate, cradling the steel case to his chest as bullets tore splinters from the wooden floor. Zeus moved like a storm, weaving through the gunfire with lethal precision, snarling and snapping, forcing the enemy to hesitate just long enough for Marcus to return fire. A sharp cry rang out as one of Cole's men went down, blood spreading rapidly across the cracked tiles. Another wave of mercenaries poured in, and Marcus knew they couldn't hold this ground for long. "Go!" Cole shouted over the din. "Take the evidence, get it out." Marcus didn't hesitate. He tucked the case under one arm, motioned sharply to Zeus, and sprinted toward the far side of the vault, where another maintenance hatch was supposed to lead to the surface. But Vance himself was already there, waiting, a pistol in his hand, his face twisted with pure, unfiltered hatred. "You should have died in that warehouse," Vance snarled, raising the gun, finger tightening on the trigger. Time slowed to a crawl. Marcus's own weapon was pinned beneath the steel case. He was exposed, vulnerable, no chance to dodge, no cover to dive behind. He met Vance's eyes, bracing for the shot he couldn't escape. But Zeus moved faster. In an instant, Zeus hurled himself between Marcus and the barrel of the gun, a blur of dark fur and muscle. The shot cracked like a whip, loud and final. Zeus took the bullet in his shoulder, the impact twisting his body mid-air. But he landed hard, snarling through the pain, and launched himself at Vance with a ferocity Marcus had never seen before. a savage, primal rage that ripped through every restraint, every fragment of his training. Zeus had been bred and conditioned never to kill, only to incapacitate, to neutralize threats with precision. But in that moment, instinct overrode programming. Love overrode obedience. Zeus clamped his powerful jaws around Vance's throat, driving the man backward with crushing force. They slammed into the wall, Vance's pistol clattering uselessly to the ground. Blood sprayed across the steel panels, and Vance's screams choked into a wet gurgle before falling silent. Marcus watched, stunned and horrified and grateful all at once, as Zeus finally released the lifeless body, panting heavily, his injured leg trembling but his eyes burning with defiant life. The world around them blurred into chaos. Gunfire, shouting, the wail of distant sirens growing louder, but all Marcus could see was Zeus standing there, battered but unbroken, the living embodiment of everything the enemy had tried and failed to destroy. The stench of gunpowder and blood clung to the air, thick and suffocating as Marcus scooped up the evidence case with trembling hands, his wounded side burning with every ragged breath. Zeus limped to his side, his injured shoulder staining the floor with each step, but his spirit was unbroken. Eyes locked on Marcus, ready to fight to the last breath. Around them, the firefight raged on, Cole's team holding the line against the remnants of Vance's corrupted forces. But it was clear they were losing ground. Alarms howled louder, mingling with the mechanical rumble that Marcus instantly recognized the facility's self-destruct protocols had been triggered. Whether by design or desperation, Vance's final contingency plan was now in motion. Red emergency lights strobed across the vault, casting the chaos in a surreal, hellish glow. "You have to move," Marcus shouted hoarsely, clutching the case tighter. Cole, blood streaking down one side of his face, nodded grimly and motioned toward a secondary corridor barely visible through the haze. Zeus was already moving, nudging Marcus's thigh with his muzzle, pushing him toward the only hope of escape. They sprinted, or rather staggered, as fast as their battered bodies allowed, weaving through falling debris and the wreckage of what had once been the heart of a secret empire. Explosions rocked the foundations beneath them, throwing them off balance, showering them with dust and shattered concrete. Marcus gritted his teeth against the pain, forcing himself onward, knowing that to slow was to die. A final blast somewhere deep in the facility triggered a cascade of fire and smoke that chased them like a living beast. The heat was unbearable, scalding the air in his lungs, peeling the skin from the walls. They reached the last junction, a rusted maintenance door leading to an old stairwell. But just as Marcus reached for the handle, a section of the ceiling gave way with a deafening roar. The shockwave hurled him across the hall, the case flying from his grip, skittering into the smoke. He hit the ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in his body, vision swimming. Flames licked closer, hungrily devouring everything. Through the blur, Marcus saw Zeus dragging himself across the floor, muscles trembling with the effort, ignoring his own wounds, focusing solely on reaching Marcus. Another explosion rocked the world, closer this time, a shockwave that threatened to rip the facility apart. Marcus tried to rise, to crawl, but his limbs betrayed him, refusing to answer the desperate commands of his mind. He was too weak, too broken. In those final moments, as the firestorm closed in, Marcus understood the truth he had refused to face. He wouldn't make it out. But Zeus refused to accept that fate. With a roar that was more than just a bark, more than just a growl, it was a defiance of death itself. Zeus seized Marcus's vest between his teeth and hauled him toward the maintenance door with a strength born of pure will. Inch by grueling inch, Zeus dragged Marcus through the choking smoke, muscles tearing, blood streaming from reopened wounds, driven by nothing but loyalty and an unbreakable bond. Marcus could barely comprehend it through the haze of agony and grief, but some part of him realized that Zeus was sacrificing everything for him, pouring every last drop of strength into this final act. They reached the door just as the firestorm engulfed the hallway behind them. Zeus slammed his weight against the rusted lever, forcing it down, the door creaking open just wide enough for Marcus to be pulled through. Zeus shoved him into the stairwell with a desperate grunt, shielding Marcus's body with his own as the fire roared past, scorching the walls black. The blast slammed the door shut behind them, cutting off the inferno with a teeth-rattling boom. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of distant flames and the ragged gasps of Marcus struggling to breathe. He reached out, hand shaking, and found Zeus lying beside him, chest heaving, eyes half-lidded but still burning with fierce, unyielding life. Tears blurred Marcus's vision, hot and bitter, but he forced himself upright, cradling Zeus's battered body against his own. "I've got you, buddy," he whispered hoarsely. "I've got you." Somehow they made it up the stairwell, out into the shattered night where the storm had finally broken, the rain washing the blood and soot from their skin. Cole and the handful of survivors stumbled out after them, battered and scorched but alive, dragging the case and whatever salvaged files they could carry. Sirens wailed in the distance, but this time they weren't instruments of corruption, they were the vanguard of a reckoning long overdue. In the days that followed, the city woke to a new reality. Marcus stood before cameras and crowds, bruised, scarred, but unbroken, the steel case of evidence laid bare for the world to see. Names were named, crimes were confessed, empires of deceit crumbled under the weight of truth, Vance's network unraveled like rotten cloth, and those who had clung to power through lies and blood were dragged into the light. Marcus didn't seek fame, he didn't want glory, but the city needed a symbol, something to rally around, and so Marcus Evans, bloodied, betrayed but victorious, became that symbol. He became the face of a purge that swept through Haven City like wildfire, a cleansing fire that spared no one, not even the once untouchable elite. And at his side, through it all, stood Zeus, healed but forever bearing the scars of the night they had torn down an empire together. Where Marcus went, Zeus followed, a living testament to loyalty that no force on earth could destroy. Together, they had survived the inferno. Together, they would rebuild something better. If this story moved you, if the bond between Marcus and Zeus struck something deep inside you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more cinematic journeys that honor loyalty, courage, and the human spirit. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which moment shook you the most? What decision by Marcus or Zeus stayed with you long after the story ended? And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one.